somewhere in a research lab, a scientist is looking at a genetic mutation in an insect and using it to answer a question about you. Not about the insect itself, about humans. About something we did over 80,000 years ago, something so ordinary today that we never think twice about it. This tiny genetic clue might completely change what you think you know about the origins of clothing. Body lice, the kind that live specifically in clothing rather than hair, genetically split off from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That number matters enormously, because body lice cannot survive without fabric to live in. No clothing, no body lice. Which means this single insect, still crawling around today, is one of our clearest biological signatures for exactly when humans started covering their bodies. If insects are our best evidence for when clothing began, what were early humans actually wearing that far back? And how do we know anything at all when the clothes themselves vanished from the earth so long ago? Clothing might be one of the oldest technologies humanity has ever developed, and also one of the hardest to actually study. Fur rots, plant fiber disintegrates, leather breaks down into the soil within centuries, not millennia. Which means archaeologists can almost never hold the actual garment in their hands. Instead, they read the story sideways, through tools left behind, through cut marks scratched into ancient bone, and through the rare, almost accidental discovery that somehow survived against impossible odds. So if the clothing itself is gone, what tools were early humans actually using to make it in the first place? In 2021, researchers working in a cave in Morocco uncovered something remarkable: 62 specialized bone tools, dated to somewhere between 90,000 and 120,000 years old, smoothed and shaped specifically for scraping and softening hide. Beside them, something even more telling, the bones of carnivores, foxes, jackals, wildcats, marked not with the rough cuts of butchery, but with precise, deliberate skinning marks. These tools prove humans were making clothing this far back. But here's the detail that should stop you. Why skin foxes and jackals specifically, animals nobody was eating for dinner? The most likely answer is fur itself, and specifically its quality. Certain carnivores carry dense, insulating pelts, exactly the kind of material you'd want between your body and a brutal ice age wind. These weren't hunting trophies. They were raw material, chosen deliberately for what their skin could become. And fur, it turns out, may be one of the oldest clothing materials humans have ever relied on. Some evidence points to fur use stretching back over 120,000 years, while hide processing for clothing and shelter reaches even further, to roughly 400,000 years ago, deep into the Paleolithic. Long before our own species even existed in its current form, Neanderthals were already scraping, softening, and shaping animal hide into wearable protection against the cold. Picture it. A Neanderthal crouched beside a fire, working a stiff, frozen hide back and forth with a stone scraper, hour after hour, turning something stiff and lifeless into something that could actually keep a body alive through winter. This wasn't decoration. This was survival, hard-won, one hide at a time. If Neanderthals were already wearing fur, what changed when a different kind of human, one that would eventually replace them entirely, arrived on the same frozen landscape? Around 40,000 years ago, Cro-Magnon humans brought something new to the process: precision. Using finely shaped bone needles and awls, they moved beyond simple wraps and drapes into something closer to true tailoring: fitted pants, shirts, hoods, and boots, cut and stitched specifically to the shape of the human body. One historian has compared the sophistication of this early tailoring to the construction quality of modern Arctic clothing, an almost unbelievable claim for something made entirely from stone tools and animal hide. This wasn't just about staying warm anymore. It was engineering, refined generation after generation, until a needle and a scrap of hide could produce something built specifically to move, bend, and survive alongside its owner. But needles and hides can only tell us so much. What about color? What about style? Is there any evidence that humans, this early in our story, actually cared about how they looked? In a cave in the Republic of Georgia, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary: flax fibers dyed in shades of black, gray, turquoise, and pink, dated to roughly 36,000 BCE. This is the earliest known evidence of textile fiber use on record, and it arrives with a detail almost nobody expects. These fibers were dyed, deliberately colored, tens of thousands of years before anyone had woven a single piece of actual cloth. Which means somewhere in that impossibly distant past, a human being wasn't just solving a survival problem. They were making a choice about color. About how something should look, not just how it should function. If humans were dyeing fiber this early, when did they finally figure out how to weave those fibers into something wearable? The answer comes from an unlikely source, not cloth itself, but clay. At Dolní Věstonice in the modern-day Czech Republic, archaeologists found something the ancient world left behind almost by accident: faint impressions of woven textiles, basketry, and knotted netting, pressed into soft clay roughly 27,000 years ago and preserved as that clay hardened over time. The fabric itself is long gone. Its exact shape, texture, and weave pattern survived anyway, fossilized in negative space. Around this same period, roughly 25,000 years ago, so-called Venus figurines began appearing across Western and Eastern Europe, carved with unmistakable detail, basket-woven hats, belts, and what appears to be a string skirt wrapped around the hips. This is art functioning as evidence, a frozen snapshot of exactly what humans were choosing to wear, deliberately carved by someone who wanted this recorded. Clothing had officially evolved from raw animal hide into woven, constructed fiber. But this raises a much bigger question. Once basic warmth wasn't the only concern anymore, why did people keep wearing clothes at all? This is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because historians don't fully agree. Some point to adornment and status, clothing as a way to visually announce identity, achievement, or rank within a group, the same impulse that would eventually put leopard skins on Egyptian priests and royalty as a mark of power. Others point toward an even more debated theory, first proposed by early 20th century anthropologists, suggesting clothing may have played a role in sexual signaling and attraction. It's important to be clear here. These are competing academic theories, actively debated, not settled fact. Nobody can prove, with certainty, exactly why a specific ancient human chose to wear what they wore. And just when you think you've found a pattern, one archaeological case complicates every single theory at once: a group of people who had clothing, and then simply chose to give it up. Archaeological evidence shows that Aboriginal Tasmanians used hide scrapers and bone awls for garment making somewhere between 32,000 and 12,000 years ago. Then, strikingly, that evidence disappears from the archaeological record entirely. The tools stop showing up. The technology, by all appearances, was simply abandoned. If a population could survive, generation after generation, through genuinely harsh conditions without clothing they had once relied on, what does that tell us about everything we assumed clothing was actually for? Maybe it was never one single, universal answer. Maybe different humans, in different environments, needed different things from the exact same invention. Now bring every piece of this story together: the lice DNA whispering a date scientists could never have found any other way, the Moroccan bone tools and their carefully skinned carnivores, Neanderthals hunched over hides beside ancient fires, Cro-Magnon needles stitching fitted boots and hoods, dyed flax fibers colored purely by choice, woven impressions pressed into hardening clay, carved figurines wearing string skirts, and an entire population that simply walked away from the whole idea. All of it converges, remarkably, in a single frozen body, discovered in 1991, high in the Alps. Otzi the Iceman, roughly 5,300 years old, wearing the most complete prehistoric outfit ever recovered. Goat hide leggings. A bearskin hat. A cloak woven from grass. Shoes stuffed with heifer insulation. Materials pulled from 6 different animal species, and fibers sourced from 17 different types of tree. Every single material Otzi wore had already existed in human hands for tens of thousands of years before he was even born. He wasn't wearing something new. He was wearing something perfected, the final, polished result of an idea humans had been quietly refining since long before anyone thought to write a single word down. Long before we had writing, cities, or even language as we know it, humans were already solving one of our oldest problems: not just how to survive the world, but how to face it dressed.